Ray tracing has been around for a while now, and it's kind of transformed the way games look to the point where we're kind of getting used to it. But Megalights is a future, new kind of lighting technology which could have a similar kind of impact. Looks really impressive, so let's take a look at this.
Okay, so Unreal Fest 2024, a showcase for new epic technology. And we got to see a new technology called Megalights, which looks quite intriguing. Now, Alex,
sure,
you've got to talk us through this one because it's certainly quite impactful, right?
So the what Megalights is trying to solve is the fact that in rasterized graphics, you can have a lot of lights, but the conceit is shadowing them, making them shadowed lights is very expensive because you have to render the entire scene from the light's perspective to get the shadow map. And there's just a hard limit on performance for that. If you think about it, it'd be like if you have hundreds of shadow casting lights, that means hundreds of separate rendering cameras throughout the world, not rendering textures and things like that, but they're rendering something from the perspective of that, that shadow casting light. And that doesn't scale up at all. So ray tracing as a competitor technology would make that cheaper because you're not having to re-render the whole scene. You're just kind of bouncing a ray around the scene to see whether or not it sees a light or not. And the issue with ray tracing is that you have to send out a lot of rays. So how do you know where to see whether or not one pixel's in shadow or not? You have to send out a lot of rays. So there's been variety of ray tracing technologies that have come up to sample lights in a better way. One of them that we've talked a lot about on the channel before is Reester, which NVIDIA terms as RTXDI, and we've seen it in a number of titles on PC. We've covered it most recently in Star Wars Outlaws, where you can see in that game it makes it so every single light in the scene is shadow casting, and it also...
Now, even that makes a pretty impactful difference. If you look at the stall on the left, compare it to the one on the right is much more realistic looking. It just looks wrong. And that one now on the left, and the shadows from the table as well on the cups and stuff on the table look far more realistic. Yeah, much better. That's RTX DI, but this Megalights sounds like a whole new level completely.
Star Wars Outlaws, where you can see in that game it makes it so every single light in the scene is shadow casting, and it also adds in new light sources altogether. New area light sources, for example. That's the grounds of things. Unreal Engine 5 does not support RTX DI or Reester by default. And what this video shows that they brought out originally, we can talk about also the whole stream quality thing. They showed it off on this 1080p stream over YouTube, 60 FPS stream. And what it shows is the game running on PlayStation 5 at some unknown resolution and frame rate we'll talk about later. Where they go through a scene and they show off now through using something called Megalights. They can have it so that they don't say every single light, but they say basically like thousands of lights in a scene can now be considered shadow casting. And if they go through this interesting trailer, you'll see through most of the scene, like in the beginning of it, they're showing off particular types of lights, area lights, which are hard to get shadows from because light isn't emanating from a point there, but it's emanating from an entire surface. Mm-hmm. So the area, usually the shadows from that are very diffuse and they have a shape to them that is unique. Those are hard to render and actually impossible to render with rasterization. But later on the trailer, they go to this like market area and they show that a bunch of lights on, and it kind of looks like, I would say, a current generation game at that moment. But then they switch on Megalights, which changes the entire rendering path for forward direct lighting, and you get a bunch of shadows in the environment that weren't there before. And it's very interesting because it's actually a huge difference, I would say, in like side-by-side visual quality. And they're showing it running on a PlayStation 5. And
apparently, I haven't seen this video before, but I did hear about this scene just in a text thing. But apparently in this one market scene, where she's walking through this market scene, there's over 1,000 of these Megalights affecting the scene. Now, this is just a tech demo in a way, and even though it is being shown on the PS5, it's a very still image at the moment. There's nothing going on in the scene. It does look stunning, to be fair. The difference between the Megalights on and off was absolutely huge. But already at this early stage of this video, I'd be very surprised if this was going to be implemented into current gen consoles. Possible maybe on PC, because obviously PCs are almost limitless in what you can do with them if you're willing to throw enough money at them. But yeah, this looks really impressive so far.
You get a bunch of shadows in the environment that weren't there before. And it's very interesting because it's actually a huge difference, I would say, in like side-by-side visual quality.
Yeah.
And they're showing it running on a PlayStation 5. And technologies like Reester are very expensive to render. They just have like a flat cost that is high, in spite of being way faster than the rasterization alternative. So Epic here is doing something very bespoke in particular for what to get it to run on PlayStation 5, and I think there's a lot I can say about that actually. But we kind of got a sense about how it's rendering on PlayStation 5. I think when they sent us a higher quality version of that feed, that 1080p60 feed, it was actually like super high quality. But then they also released like a 30-second sizzle reel of a recording running also what appears to be on PlayStation 5. That is also 60 FPS. And you get to see some more of the limitations I would see there than that initial stream, where the stream was like really blocky and smudgy and not very good quality at all. But then when it's actually at like a higher output quality, you can see where the shortcuts are coming in. And I think, Rich, you noticed some things in there, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. It was, how do you describe it? There's certain things in there that were reminiscent to me of what we saw in like the Cyberpunk 2077 past facing.
Mm-hmm.
Typically accumulation across frames. The lighting seemed to transition quite slowly, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of very sort of typical of Reester. Also, it's kind of like a sort of grainy effect to it.
Yeah.
So you can see the trades that are being made, and I think you can understand that there's, it's still experimental.
Yeah.
Frame rate also, I think you pointed out that it's kind of in a weird 30 to 35 FPS no man's land generally.
Weird.
Yeah, this is why already at this early stage of this clip, I'm thinking this won't be current gen. This is going to be PlayStation 6, the next Xbox, and so on. I think it's because even if it was possible now, I don't really want it at 25, 30 frames a second. That'd be horrible. Any kind of game where it's exploration based, things like this, the vast majority of people want it at least 60 frames a second from it. Just a much smoother, more enjoyable experience, and people are generally willing to sacrifice a little bit of graphical fidelity for that extra frame rate. So this is all well and good, but we don't want it if it's just going to make the game choppy and horrible to play at 25, 30 frames a second and then fall apart even further as soon as something starts to happen. Because these scenes so far, it's just a girl walking through the marketplace or maybe up these stairs, but nothing going on. When you get into a gunfight, a firefight, things start, falling over and part of the environment starts getting destroyed, things like that, then you don't want it, falling apart. So for me already at this early stage, I'm thinking this is really good experimental tech, but more likely to be next gen. But we'll see what they say.
Weird decision for it to be showcased that way, but yeah, it is for some reason.
Yeah, but what can you say? The visual impact is astonishing, and as first iteration of this work, it's highly promising.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We do get some details after the fact. I asked behind the scenes as well, as there's a post by Andrew Lordson on Beyond 3D when he was asked about it. It is not using Reester directly, but it is using a way of sampling lights that is going to be adjacent to it, to similar research there. It's probably just cheaper. Another thing that we know from other investigations is that the default setting, and this is probably actually different even on PlayStation 5, is that it's sending rays at half resolution of internal resolution. That's something that Reester doesn't do, for example. NVIDIA always wants those kind of things done at full res, just to fit in better with their denoisers. Another thing that was interesting to see from the trailer as well too is that I did count it. It is in many parts just 1080p internal resolution. I think that is obvious in kind of like the overall like pixel perfectness of the trailer. But as they get towards the end of it, when the main character walks in this hallway, this like elevator that kind of ascends, I think at the end, and a lot of lights turn on and this like circular, I don't know,
that part looks
atrium.
really nice.
I don't know what to even call it. You can see that as the lights turn on at the very end of it, there's a lot of things like Rich was talking about, like light lag and the denoiser failing. So you see a lot of like larger scale noise. It like blows up the noise actually to be like large. One thing you can see is that as all the lights turn on, if you look at the floor, there's these hanging kind of spherical lights. And from a lot of them, I think it's like the first maybe 4 or 5 or 6 lights on left or right side, you can actually see there's a specular reflection beneath them. But from the ones beyond that, you cannot see the specular reflection beneath them. And the reasons for that might be that there's some sort of, due to the way lights are sampled, that there's a hard cutoff, like within like a certain distance from the camera, or the noise is too high from those lights in the distance so that the denoiser is actually killing the specularity from them. And the interesting part about this is them showing it on PS5, but they also sent us screenshots of what the PC version of Megalights looks like. And in that scene, you can see actually that there's no such limitation for the lights in the distance on the floor. You can see the specular lights sheen from all the lights in the room. So they are showing it off in an interesting, optimized form on PlayStation 5 there. I guess one thing...
The thing is, though, would you notice that when playing the game? I mean, Digital Foundry do like to show faults and errors in games, things like that, for image quality and things like that. Kind of well known for it. But would you notice that the lights weren't reflecting from the 5th or 6th light down when playing the game? They actually had to, again, slow it down and zoom it in to show that. Would you notice that when playing the game normally? And even if you did, would you think, oh, this Megalights isn't actually all it's cracked up to be? These lights weren't showing on the floor from the 6th light downwards. I don't think it's going to matter too much, but they are just kind of showing where Megalights is at the moment, I suppose. So I'm not really knocking them, but I don't think it's going to matter in the real world. But let's carry on.
Thing I'm curious about this, and I would ask this into the plainer discussion here, is this something that will actually ship in games at the promised levels that Epic says it will? Maybe. I know it's experimental right now, but kind of go to the Matrix demo that we saw years back. And honestly, I know games take a long time to develop, but hardware lumen is pretty much a no-show on console. And that demo was all about hardware lumen, right? The promises at the beginning of the generation that UE5 games would also be 60 FPS in some capacity, I feel like hasn't been borne out in a good way. I don't think that's the current generation's fault. It's not the PS5's fault. It's not the Xbox's fault. It's not PC's fault. Wherever it applies to, it's the developer's fault. The fact of the matter is, a PS5 and even a PS4 or an Xbox Series X or Xbox One are capable of doing 60 frames a second. What changes that is developers continuously pushing graphics and graphical effects as far as they can so it doesn't actually make 60 frames a second possible. So they have to downgrade it to 30 frames a second. The only way to combat this would be for something like Microsoft or Sony, whatever, to actually insist that games of that nature, the exploration type games, your shooters, things like that, have to run at 60 frames a second no matter what. And you are bound by the capabilities of the machine, whatever, for the graphics you can chuck at it, rather than the other way around. People now like to go graphics first, limit games or reduce them to 30 frames a second, or worse sometimes. And most gamers, when they're given the option, always pick performance mode over graphical fidelity just to get the extra frames a second. People prefer 60 frames a second over slightly better graphics or slightly more graphical effects and a lower frame rate. It's been shown time and time again. I think something like 77-80% of PlayStation users
When given the option, pick performance mode, which is higher frame rate. So, yeah, I don't think the 60 frames a second thing is a fault of the actual console itself. It's just the developers just pushing graphics too far all the time.
I don't think other than Fortnite or
Jusant.
Yeah.
Jusant, yeah, which we can all talk about why those are 60 FPS experiences. That's pretty obvious. But yeah, like, what do you guys think about this? Like, what's your opinion, Oliver?
I thought it was really a stunning demo. I think it's a lot like RTX Ti, but like you said, I mean, the performance level is high enough for console use, which opens up a lot of cases that weren't possible before, because ultimately you don't really want to build a game around requiring this kind of high level of RT fidelity everywhere to look good, right? Because you're going to have to ship it on console. But I think one possible problem here, and just kind of like looking at it, maybe Alex, you could comment on this, but it kind of does seem like you'd maybe need to build a game around this a little bit, because like when you start to look at the level of quality that you need for like the BVH to do shadows, like all this direct lighting.
Which is what you don't want. You don't want Megalights to be a thing where people think, okay, we want to show a game that uses Megalights really well. So what game can we create that does that, and then build a game around the fact you're going to use Megalights? That's not the way it should be. You should design a game around the game first, and Megalights is basically an option, an added feature, which just makes it that much better. If you start building around a game around a lighting effect, then I'm not sure how you're going to do that too successfully myself. But yeah, let's carry on.
All these shadows, you kind of can't get away with the same simplifications and the same compromises you'd use for like GI, let's say, or maybe for reflections where you're overlaying a lot of that screen space information. You don't need the highest quality assets there. I think that's maybe a constraint that you need to have in mind to build a game around. And I do kind of wonder, like, you have this, obviously it's an experimental feature, but like you look at this and you think, okay, well, already it's like 1080p, 30, not great image quality on console in kind of a more, carefully crafted environment here. To actually get that in a full shipping game where you're actually building it around this kind of feature, maybe that's not something that we're going to see too often in this generation. Right. Personally, I'm kind of more invested. Like, I think Megalights is a really cool demo. I think it looks amazing, but I'm personally like more interested in what Epic is talking about with hardware lumen optimizations on console to hit 60 FPS. Like, that to me is more exciting. Could potentially be applied to projects that are in development, not just projects that might start development now that are built around certain lighting technologies, at least from what I can tell, right? And that could possibly give you a big fidelity boost to a project that might get released in like 2026 or something, possibly, right? That is in progress today. They're using software lumen. They're not happy with the performance, or they're not happy with the visual fidelity there, but they need it for the performance. Now all of a sudden they can adopt hardware lumen at maybe 30 FPS or maybe even 60 FPS and get a really good result on the consoles. So that's really what I'm more invested in from this Unreal Showcase. But for sure, you look at this and it's like, wow, this is like insane. It's running on a console. It looks outrageous, but it's also like, this is kind of a demo, I think.
Yeah, it's a demo of what is possible for the future. I don't think it's going to happen on PS5. We're already 4 years into the PS5 generation, and the PS6 is probably 3 or 4 years away, maybe, something like that. So, on a console that's a lot more powerful than what we've got now, and things always progress, no matter how powerful things are in the beginning, and new technology comes out like this to push things even further all the time, then I think a PS6 that could run this effortlessly at 60 frames a second or more in a proper game, not a game designed around the Megalights effect themselves, is kind of where we're kind of at, I think.
Ultimately.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. I think this is more an interesting future proof of concept for something that will be shipping in like PS6 games, more or less, due to just the things that you mentioned, the lack of image quality there, the fact that you need to build a game around it. One very important thing to talk about this demo is that they don't showcase the kind of killer scenario. And that's the reason why NVIDIA has ray reconstruction, is where they just show like a light and like moving characters, and a light moves and the character moves at the same time. Denoisers are going to go, they're probably going to do that really badly, because there's just like a fight to keep things good looking, and then as soon as they start moving, all the heuristics that say let's try and make this pixel look good are thrown out the window, and you get all this either noise or extreme light lag and ghosting. And that's why NVIDIA has ray reconstruction, and that's something that enables RTX DI to actually work really well, I would say, in modern games. It's a big boost towards its image quality, and that wouldn't be available here, and I think it could break a lot of scenes, presuming they don't have some sort of magical breakthrough in denoising in the next 2 years or something like that. So yeah, there's that. I am also of your opinion that just to say it, on the sidelines in different parts of this presentation and this Unreal Fest, they describe the fact they are optimizing hardware lumen to better focus on, when they say getting up to 60 hertz, what they're talking really about is actually getting that like CPU performance up, and some of the GPU performance as well there too, but really CPU performance in UE5 with hardware lumen isn't the greatest. And there's a lot of optimizations going on there to bring it up, which then could enable things like better performance overall for using hardware lumen, as well as enabling the concept that you can maybe target 60 hertz on console with hardware lumen, to the point where now UE 5.5 will default when you start it up to using the hardware lumen path, which is something it didn't do before. You had to enable it separately in the settings, and no one did that. That's why almost every game ships with software lumen. So there's that. I think this is an interesting proof of concept demo, but it obviously, there's enough corner cutting in there that I think when you look at it, it's hard to imagine a game being designed around it at the moment. So I would say this is really cool future tech, and I'm really excited to see what it means on next gen hardware at the moment, more so than current gen.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I agree with that. And also just generally, it's, in terms of the current sort of roadmap of Unreal Engine 5, all eyes are on the Coalition.
Yes, right?
Gears E-Day to see just, what the best in the business can do with this technology. And I think we've all got very, very high expectations there. Okay, with that, let's move on.
Right, so, Megalights. So we'll go back to that scene when we saw the lights come on, because that was pretty spectacular. Well, I should go back to this scene here where we look at it before the Megalights were turned on, and you kind of think initially it looks all right, but it's only when the Megalights are turned on you realise that certain parts of the scene are just far too bright compared to the rest of it, and it now looks a little bit unnatural already, having just seen this for a very short amount of time.
Very interesting, because it's actually a huge difference, I would say, in like side-by-side visual quality. And they're showing it running on a PlayStation 5.
I mean, imagine games looking like this on a PlayStation 6. I think this is where we're at with this. As they said as well, I don't think this is going to be current gen stuff. This is a tech demo running at a low frame rate with nothing going on in the scene. Imagine if people started running in from that alleyway forward, shooting or whatever, and you have to fight back or something like that, and there's things flying everywhere at the same time. It's not going to hold up. If it's at 30 frames a second now, like this, imagine what's going to happen when, excuse me, basically things start happening in the scene or game, or you even start running and things like that. So it has to render it all a lot faster. PS5 can't do this right now. This is definitely for PS6 and beyond, or the next Xbox and things like that. But imagine this. This is what a game's going to look like on the PS6. Imagine this at 60 frames a second, really smooth with a gunfight going on and things flying everywhere at the same time. It's going to be absolutely spectacular. So, not for the current gen, I don't think, but certainly a really good insight of what we can look forward to for the future generation. But there it is, there's the video. If you enjoyed it, it'd be really cool if you bash that like and subscribe button. It really does help. But most of all, thanks for watching. Catch you again in the next one. Bye for now.